Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
We are an inclusive faith community
seeking to live out the loving, just, and generous way of Jesus.
We are participants in a long tradition
that's less concerned with doctrines and dogma that demand total agreement,
but a life to be lived, enjoyed, and given away to others.
What unites us is a growing awareness that life is precious.
That we are made by love in order to love.
This community is comprised of and affirms the entire human family.
Regardless of race, age, creed,
physical abilities, marital or economic status,
gender identity, or sexual orientation.
So, if you're curious and have come to see,
if you are tired and have come to rest,
if you are grateful and have come to share,
if you are wounded and have come to heal,
if you're joyful and have come to celebrate,
if you are uprooted and have come to belong,
welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
See me by the river, praying over storms. It's hard to let go of the things I think I need. And if I lose my vision, may I use your eyes to see just where it is I need to be. Oh, pride won't get us where we're going. It's made a life of standing in the way of all the beauty this world has worth knowing. Oh, pride won't get us where we're going. Oh, pride won't get us where we're going. Truth will keep on shining like the morning sun, brighter than troubled winds can blow. And if you lose your vision, you can use my eyes to see just where it is you need to go. Oh, pride won't get us where we're going. It's made a life of standing in the way of all the beauty this world has worth knowing. Oh, pride won't get us where we're going. Oh, pride won't get us where we're going. And oh, we're finally free to know the gravity, but we can overcome, we can overcome, we can overcome, we can overcome. Oh, pride won't get us where we're going. It's made a life of standing in the way of all the beauty this world has worth knowing. Oh, pride won't get us where we're going. Oh, pride won't get us where we're going.
My friend, have you lost hope again? Do you feel like somebody else? Have you got fire in your mind that keeps you up at night? I watch you run around head down and disrespect. disregarded. I see you running from your shadow. How can I ask you please to stay? You can run till you've got nothing left, but we'll still end up face to face. Be where you are. Be where you are. Don't be afraid of how you feel. Don't look for life in past or future. Look right at it dead in the eye. After this moment, there's a new one. Be where you are. Be where you are. And I know that it gets lonely and dark, and it feels hard. And I know that you want to close off your heart. You've been using all this noise to avoid meeting your mess. You don't have to work so hard. Just stop and take a breath and be where you are. Be where you are. Be where you are. Be where you are.
Good morning, Crosspointe. I want to make you aware of a few things that are happening this week. First, adult summer group sign-ups have begun. Summer groups are groups of adults who meet between 6 to 8 times throughout the summer to connect with one another, to have conversations and discussions around a variety of topics. Summer group sign-ups run through June 20th. And this summer, there are both in-person and virtual options. And if you're interested in finding out more or signing up, you can go to crosspoint.org/summergroups. Second, we know that for everyone, this has not been a typical year, but we would like to especially celebrate all the students who have made it through the school year. We invite anyone in student ministry, so this is the littles, all the way through high school, to join us on June 9th from 4 to 5:30, anytime in between that space, for the Nacho Typical School Year drive-through. It's just exactly what it sounds like. Join us for a drive-through event in the Crosspointe Church parking lot to grab a nacho treat in honor of completing this Nacho Typical Year. So again, the event will be held June 9th, 4 to 5:30 in the Crosspointe parking lot. If you're anything like me, I find it really difficult to keep track of everything that happens throughout the summer, especially when I get off my normal routine. So we've put together a Crosspointe summer events calendar, and you can find it on our Crosspointe homepage at the very top under summer events. You'll find all the events that are happening for all ages, all the necessary links and registrations for those events for the entire summer on that webpage. So we encourage you to take a look to see how you might plug in and connect with one another. There's also opportunities for service, and again, it's for all ages at Crosspointe. Lastly, it is always a joy to partner with you, to share love and encouragement with one another and with our community. And if you would like to partner with us financially to continue to make that happen, you can always find ways to donate at crosspoint.org/contribute. Happy Memorial Day weekend, Crosspointe.
Sweetheart, you look a little tired. When did you last eat? Come in and make yourself right at home. Stay as long as you need. Tell me is something wrong. If something's wrong, you can count on me. You know I'll take my heart clean apart if it helps yours beat. It's okay if you can't find the words. Let me take your coat and this weight off of your shoulders. Like a force to be reckoned with, a mighty ocean or a gentle kiss. I will love you with every single thing I have. Like a tidal wave will make a mess, or calm waters if that serves you best. I will love you without any strings attached. It's okay if you can't catch your breath. You can take the oxygen straight out of my own chest. I know exactly how the rule goes. Put my mask on first. No, I don't want to talk about myself. Tell me where it hurts. I just want to build you up till you're good as new. And maybe one day I'll get around fixing myself too. I don't even know where to start. I'm already tired of trying to recall when it
few years ago, I found myself standing in front of my therapist at this small retreat with 5 other guys who had come really from all different parts of the country. None of them were pastors. They all were leaders in different areas of their profession. And he asked 2 of these guys to stand up next to me. One on my left and the other on my right. And then he asked me to hold my arms out. And he instructed the other guys to pull. And to pull kind of hard. And so there I was, standing in the middle of the room with 2 grown men pulling on my arms in opposite directions. And my therapist asked me, Jonathan, what does that feel like to you? And I paused for a moment because I wanted to be particularly thoughtful about my reply. But surprisingly, the only thing that came to mind was, it just feels normal. I feel like this all the time. And so my therapist asked, well, what do you think it would feel like if you let one of those hands that's pulling on you go? What do you think that would do inside of you? And I was like, I have no idea. It feels like you're asking me, what would it feel like to not be alive? I have no clue what that would be. And that particular moment was the beginning of one of several ongoing waking up moments for me. Because you see, for as long as I could remember, I felt like my job, my role in the world was to hold things together. Whatever opposite forces were pulling things apart, my role, my mission, my responsibility, my calling, whatever you want to call it, felt like it's my role to hold all of it together. And this started when I was young, whether that was keeping my parents and my family together, keeping them getting along, or it was my teammates and my sports teams and holding them together, or my circle of friends that went to church, or my circle of school friends. How did I hold them together? It's just kind of what I did. And then that didn't really change as an adult. The first 30 churches I served at all had senior pastors who very early on left while I was there. And so I felt this weight, this responsibility. Oh, this is what I do. I've got to figure out how to hold these churches together during these transitions. And then around 2015, for a lot of different reasons, and I've spoken publicly about this multiple times, there started to emerge a significant cultural divide within the Big C church. And Crosspointe wasn't immune to that. And I could feel that divide getting deeper and wider. And so I defaulted to the same mode as I always did. My job was to figure out, how am I going to hold everyone together? But the thing was, I just couldn't. No matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't. And I couldn't without betraying myself and my own deep convictions. And so I felt stuck between those things. And it felt like that I was getting torn apart, literally and figuratively. But I kept coming back to, well, this is just what I have to do. This is what I do. I hold everyone together. That's my job. And that's when eventually I just broke. Or at least my body broke. And the panic attacks kicked in. And I finally just got to the point when I had to say, I need help. Because I can't figure this out by myself. And it is literally tearing me apart. And one of the things that I have to come to understand since then was that this was all a reflection of a certain kind of suffering. A certain kind of vice that I find myself suffering from at times, and I think many of us in all sorts of different ways suffer in. And what made it more difficult is that it's not something that any of us would really want to think about ourselves. I mean, it feels gross in many ways to even admit it, or frankly, to even consider it about ourselves and our own mind. But it's this feeling that we can find ourselves carrying around, a way of suffering as we go through the world, that somehow we've become indispensable to the people around us. It's this mindset that if I don't hold things together, everything is going to fall apart. That if I don't keep peace here in the family, then the family is going to break apart. That if I don't keep all the plates spinning, life as our family knows it, it's just going to crumble. That if I don't keep an eye out and stay aware of every single thing my kids are doing, then my kids are going to end up making terrible decisions and ruin their entire lives. That if I don't keep everyone on the same page here at the office, then the whole organization is going to fall apart and everyone's going to lose their jobs and their incomes and they're all going to end up homeless on the street and it's going to be my fault. And again, none of us would say these things really. I mean, let alone even admit to thinking them. But it's this inescapable feeling that many of us carry that these people need me. And if I don't meet their needs, bad things are going to happen. For the last several weeks, we've been in this series of teachings that we've called 9 Monsters, where we've been exploring these 9 core vices of humanity that have been observed in people really for thousands of years. And we've called them monsters based on the origins of the word monster, which comes from Latin, that tells us that monster is supposed to serve as a warning to show us something that we're supposed to pay attention to within ourselves when it shows up. And so the monster I want to explore today is this vice of pride. And like most of these topics, they're probably better suited for conversations and to talk about in that context. And so if you want to do that, I'd encourage you to check out the virtual lobby we have right after the service, where you can jump on a Zoom call and dialogue with a lot of different other people from Crosspointe about these same ideas. And as always, you can find the link in the description here on the YouTube channel. But before I go any further, what I want to make sure to point out is that when we're talking about pride, that pride has multiple layers and nuances to it. Because when many of us think of pride, what we immediately default to is this sense that we have this sense where we think we're better than someone else. But that's not the kind of pride that we're talking about here today. Tirza covered more of that nuance a couple weeks back when she taught through the vice of vanity. Rather, the vice of pride that I want us to look at today has much more to do with suffering, that feeling of being indispensable. But the thing is, it can be extremely hard to wake up to this type of suffering because what it looks like, and even what it feels like, is self-sacrificial love. Which, make no mistake, is a beautiful and wonderful thing. For some of you, it's your superpower in the world. It's how you navigate best in the world, walking around and seeing the world through this lens of self-sacrificial love. And that does so much good. And it shows up when you find yourself looking to serve others, looking to figure out ways to help others and to meet the needs of the people that you see around you. And it shows itself as compassion and empathy and all these wonderful, beautiful things. And obviously in the context of church, those are all values we hold extremely high. I mean, Jesus himself said absolutely everything boils down to loving people. And so the fruit of this can look really, really good and can easily be celebrated and affirmed by all sorts of other people around us. But here's where the suffering can creep in. Often we assume that has to come at the expense of not paying attention to any of our own needs and desires. And that somehow sacrificing all of our own needs is noble. And that neglecting or sacrificing all of our own needs is somehow the highest form of morality or spirituality. And it morphs into this corrupted mindset where we pretend, you know what, I don't really have any needs at all. My only need is to meet your needs. And what I'm hoping we can do today is we can start to wake up to the reality that that, in fact, isn't noble. It isn't healthy. It isn't mature. It isn't spiritual. Rather, it's a suffering of pride. Steve and I were talking about this idea a few days ago, and he said, you know, it's kind of like if you saw someone approach a long line of people waiting to get into a show, and suddenly that person you were watching just walks to the very front of the line, and they cut in front of a bunch of people who had been waiting for hours. Well, our immediate thought would be, well, who do they think they are? I mean, why do they think they're exempt? Why do they think that they're special? And we get offended by their actions because we recognize there's this kind of gross type of pride that's in play. But here's the thing, in the same way, when we exempt ourselves from having or acknowledging any of our own needs, and instead just focus on constantly sacrificing ourselves to meet everyone else's needs, you may not realize it, but there's a distorted pride in that. Where we've exempted ourselves from having needs, we somehow see ourselves as the special ones. In the very first chapter of Mark's account of Jesus' life and teachings, I find it rather compelling that right at the beginning of his narrative, Mark tells this story. Mark chapter 1, verse 29. It says that immediately Jesus left the synagogue and entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law lay ill with a fever, and immediately they told him about her. And he came and he took her by the hand and he lifted her up, and the fever left her, and she began to serve them. That evening at sundown, they brought to him all who were sick and oppressed by demons, and the whole city was gathered together at the door. And he healed many who were sick with various diseases, and he cast out many demons, and he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. And rising very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus departed and went out to a desolate place. And there he prayed. And Simon and those who were with him searched for him. And they found him and they said, Jesus, everyone is looking for you. So let's pause there for a moment, right? Jesus is taking care of Simon's mother-in-law. And then he goes on to heal all sorts of other sick people that are being brought to him. It says the whole city is at his door where Jesus is staying, trying to get to him. And so early in the morning, Jesus goes off by himself to pray. And eventually the people that were looking for him find him and say, Jesus, where have you been? Everyone's looking for you. And then notice what Jesus says next in verse 38. Let us go on to the next towns, that I also may preach there also, for that is why I came out. That's why I came out here on this journey, on this mission. So take that in for a moment. Jesus' students come to him and they're like, Jesus, everyone's looking for you. I mean, there are people who need your help. Everyone is counting on you. Everyone is depending on you. Jesus, everyone is looking to you to take care of them. And what does Jesus do? Essentially, Jesus turns his back on a ton of unmet needs in the city and says, it's time to go to the next town. I have to keep moving. Now, it's one thing to read that now, but imagine for a moment, if you could put yourself in the position of one of those people who were looking for Jesus that night. Maybe you had a child that was sick and you had spent all night wandering the Israeli landscape looking for Jesus, hoping that he could help. And when Jesus was finally tracked down, even though there were a ton of unmet needs chasing after his attention, Jesus was found. But he was taking out time to just be in quiet by himself, to pray and to care for his own inner world. And I imagine any of us, like our initial reaction would be pretty frustrated. I mean, because it would be really easy to try to guilt trip Jesus in that moment. Jesus, what about this need for my kid? And what about all that's going on and all these people? There's no way you can walk away. But Jesus doesn't cater to that. He says it's time to keep going. Years ago, I heard an author, Rob Bell, comment on this particular passage when he said, isn't it amazing that apparently even the Messiah didn't have a Messiah complex? And I love that. Even the Messiah didn't carry with him this sense of, you know what, it's my job to completely neglect myself and my own needs and my own inner world and care for everyone else's. And yet somehow, many of us try to do that exact thing. Many of us try to do more than Jesus himself did. We carry this feeling around that it's our job, our responsibility to hold everything together, to meet every single need of our spouse, of our partner, of our employees, of our employer, of our kids, our friends, anyone who has a suffering, anyone who has a need. And essentially what we try to do is we find ourselves trying to out-Messiah the Messiah. We find ourselves trying to take on a role, a job, a responsibility that even God in the flesh didn't take on. And if you're honest, many of you who struggle with this, you're exhausted by it. but you feel too guilty to even admit it because, again, it's what we've bought into is mature and spiritual and noble. So how do we start to wake up to this vice of pride? And what warning, what invitation should we take from this monster when it does start to show up in us? Well, here's a few thoughts for us. One, I think it's good to ask the question, do I find myself in a regular pattern of neglecting myself and my best interest in order to serve and meet the interest of others? Now, a couple weeks ago when I talked about the vice of sloth, we talked about how it can carry with it this sense of self-forgetting. But that type of self-forgetting has more to do with holding back one's opinions and ideas because you assume that your opinions and your ideas, your insights don't really have any value or worth in comparison to everyone else's. So you just kind of tend to forget them. But when it comes to this kind of pride, it's more about forgetting one's needs. Believing that somehow your needs are always secondary. And they're not of the same kind of worth. They're not the same kind of priority as other people's needs. I want you to take a look again at the lyrics of the song that we played right before the message today by the artist Sleeping at Last. Look at these lyrics. Sweetheart, you looked a little tired. When did you last eat? Come in and make yourself right at home. Stay as long as you need. Tell me, is something wrong? If something's wrong, you can count on me. You know, I'll take my heart clean apart if it helps yours beat. It's okay if you can't find the words. Let me take your coat and this weight off of your shoulders, like a force to be reckoned with, a mighty ocean or a gentle kiss. I will love you with every single thing I have. Like a tidal wave, I'll make a mess. Or calm waters if that serves you best. I will love you without any strings attached. It's okay if you can't catch your breath. You can take the oxygen straight out of my own chest. I know exactly how the rule goes. Put my mask on first. No, I don't want to talk about myself. Tell me where it hurts. I just want to build you up. Build you up till you're as good as new. And maybe one day I will get around to fixing myself too. Oh. I mean, some of you know exactly what that feels like. For some of you, that feeling comes and goes in waves or in different seasons. And for others of you, these lyrics describe nearly every moment of your existence. And here's what I want to remind you of. This is what the written history of our faith says. For the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. And please notice, it doesn't say simply love your neighbor. It says love your neighbor as yourself. And the reality is, many of us don't do a very good job at loving ourselves. We think, well, my needs aren't as important as his or hers or theirs, and so I'll just keep neglecting all of mine, sacrificing all of mine, because certainly that's what love looks like. I mean, certainly that's what love in its highest form is supposed to do. And in the process, it can get all corrupted, and our love becomes some type of twisted type of transaction where we're trying to get something for ourselves in return. We're trying to fill some void in our own heart in return. Once again, look at the next lyrics of that same song. I don't even know where to start. Already tired of trying to recall when it all fell apart. I just want to love you, to love you, to love you well. I just want to learn how, somehow, to be loved myself. Ultimately, what can be happening below the surface is we can find ourselves trying to meet all the needs of those around us, trying to make ourselves indispensable so that we can feel loved, we can feel needed, that we can feel like we belong. And gosh, that can be humiliating to wake up to when that becomes the motivation in our hearts at times, but it's necessary if we want to actually be free and healthy and learn to love in a way that comes from a healthy place. Here's another question to ask, to check our pulse if this is a vice that we can find ourselves suffering from. Does it ever feel wrong for me to ask, what do I want right now? Does it ever feel wrong for me to ask, what do I want right now? Now, this isn't about whether you struggle with being indecisive or not. That's a whole other thing. Whether you struggle to make decisions or take any sort of action, that's something else. This is about whether it ever feels shameful to you to ask the question, what do I want? Do you feel shame when you ask that question? Whether it feels selfish to even entertain the idea of your own wants and desires. And if it does, you may find yourself suffering from this vice of pride. Because again, the idea is that you're exempting yourself. It's okay for others to have needs and desires, but not you. Because if you admit that you have needs, what you start to convince yourself of is then, well, you're not as worthy of love somehow. You have to come down off this super nobility and spirituality, and you have to bring yourself down to everyone else where you need help and you need love from other people. And when that happens, what we find ourselves doing is not actually participating in any sort of community. We're not actually participating in any mutually shared relationships with other people, and frankly, unwilling to participate in even what it actually just means to be human, because we've become too prideful to express our own needs and wants. Some of us, some of you, you'll give to others all day long. You will. It's your superpower. But the idea of asking for help yourself, the idea of expressing a need or a want or a desire seems so incredibly threatening. And when we find ourselves in those spaces, we need to sit with, why is that? Why do we think we're exempt? Why do you think you're exempt? What messages have you believed that make you feel exempt? Because the truth is, they're not coming from God. No one can argue that that's what's best for you and best for your life and even best for the world around you. And here's the thing, we can all hear that and think, well, of course that makes sense. And man, if we really tease that out, we're like, man, that's a pretty messed up way of thinking and living. But often the rational way of thinking has a very difficult time translating into how we actually feel emotionally, which is what can make this so tricky. And then here's one more question to help us gauge this vice in us. Does it ever feel like bitterness is slowly starting to build up because it feels like the love and appreciation you're getting in return is tiny compared to what you're giving out to others? And you see, that's an important question to wrestle with, because what it does is it pulls back the curtain on any sense that we may be carrying that what's really going on by how we love is a transaction of some kind. It starts to reveal that, oh, the way I love comes with this somebody owes me. And the thing is, oftentimes, that bitterness doesn't show up right away. It could be slowly building for months. Some of us, it builds for years, others even just decades. But there comes this point usually when this vice is in play, that this embittered feeling of, why don't I feel this kind of love in return, reaches a boiling point. And often it comes out with this explosion of emotion. And it's usually a shock to all the people around you because you've never expressed needs or desires before. And this often happens in communities of faith, where for some of you, you grew up in faith contexts where you were told, if you don't do these things, if you sacrifice all the things you could want and just ask God what He wants and then do those things, then it will pay off for you. You'll find the perfect spouse someday. You'll have kids that will turn out just the way you hoped. You'll never feel alone. God will always feel close. You'll be successful. You'll have the best life possible. And some of you tried that formula and it didn't work out the way you were told it would. And if you'll allow me just a bit of a tangent here, here's what happens next. Either one, when it doesn't work out the way that you were told it was, you're told it's your fault. You have too much sin in your life. You've made too many errors and you've just kept God's blessing from your life and you just get riddled with shame as a result. Or 2, you're told, well, you know what, just keep sacrificing and neglecting your own heart and life because the real payoff comes after you die. So just keep it up, because even if you're exhausted and you're drained all the time now, you're going to get to relax in a big fancy mansion someday for eternity in the sky. And so you know what, just keep going. It doesn't really matter your own needs right now. Or 3, perhaps the formula did seem to work out for you for whatever reason. It just happened to work out. And so what ends up happening to many people in that situation is they become very judgmental of others who struggle because they just didn't have the discipline apparently, or they didn't have strong enough faith to follow the formula like you did. Or 4, you realize, you know what? This didn't work out the way I was told it would. And so you just get bitter and you get resentful at God because you don't feel the love and appreciation and success you feel like you were told would happen if you just followed all the rules and sacrificed everything. And so now you're just perpetually angry all the time at the entire world, and it spills out on all these other people around you because the whole thing just felt like a lie. The whole thing felt like a sham. Or 5, you start to wake up to the reality that, you know what? If you saw a human parent love in that transactional kind of a way, you would freely agree that was a bad, toxic parent who didn't know what love was actually like. So if we would all think that about a human parent who we saw loved that way, why would we let ourselves believe that's how God actually loves? And when we start to wake up to that, what we wake up to the reality of is that may have been presented to us as this system of love and faith that was in reality transactional. That's what was presented to us. But we get invited into the possibility of then, what if God's heart and Jesus' heart weren't actually like that at all? What if God's heart represented the best form of love we can imagine? What if it represented the best of love and not the worst of love? How might that change things in the here and now, as well as how you and I think about forever, if we allowed ourselves to actually believe that? So, with all that said, what do we do to fix it? How do we fix this warning light, this monster that can show itself to us about what's actually going on in our inner world? Well, here's some closing thoughts to wrap up with. 1, I'm sorry, but this isn't about fixing it. Rather, it's just mostly about seeing it. And even if it could be fixed, I'm definitely not the guy to tell you how. I'd be taking notes right there along with you and trying to figure it out. But rather, what I've come to start to embrace is that it's mostly about waking up to the reality of it. Waking up to the pride that exists and seeing it for what it is. The spirit of martyrdom that can be lurking in the background that disguises itself as mature and spiritual, but in reality is an immature and unhealthy view of love. Because when we're blind to it, we can find ourselves exhausted or bitter or resentful, feeling shamed for even having or articulating a need. But when we can see it for what it is, we're able to recognize what's going on, see it as unhealthy, and try to choose a healthier route rather than continuing to suffer in the same ways over and over again and never seeing a way through it. Another thought. If this becomes one of the primary ways you navigate in the world, discipline yourself with some extended time alone. Now that may be just a few hours, or it may need to turn into a few days, but what you begin to find is that when you're typically in a room or a home or an office with other people, what you tend to find is that your best and most creative energies are often consumed with trying to figure out how to care for other people. And again, this isn't a bad thing. It is such a tremendous gift to so many people in the world, where you go throughout your day with this antenna always up, where someone in the room cocks their eyebrow just slightly and you're so intuitive to others' needs that you immediately pick up that something is off and something's off with them and their world. And so you make an effort and an intentionality to go in and check in on them and make sure that they're okay. Or someone is being a bit more quiet than normal in the room and you start to think of ways to immediately draw them back into the conversation, or you sense that they may be upset. So instead you start protecting them from others being more intrusive because you sense that they really don't want to talk about it. And again, this antenna that you have is such a beautiful gift, and it's a superpower that some of you bring into the world, and it makes the lives of others often so much better. But because of the amount of energy that you're constantly expending doing that, you have to get away from people on some sort of disciplined basis so that you can pay attention to your own inner world, your own wants and feelings. And when you do that, even though it'll seem threatening at first, what you'll likely start to discover is that in those moments, you're able to be more creative. You're able to think better strategically because your best energies aren't always focused on other people, but instead you can focus those energies elsewhere on things and ideas and systems and, again, your own inner world. And often when that happens, you can start to experience some much needed healing. And then here's one last thought. Allow yourself to relax into the virtue of humility. Humility is the virtue that the vice of pride relaxes into when we're operating in health. And the thing about humility here is this isn't thinking less about yourself. This isn't thinking lowly about yourself as we tend to think about that. This isn't thinking that your feelings don't matter, that you don't matter. Instead, this virtue of humility is when we can relax into the reality that we aren't responsible for holding everything in the world together. That we aren't solely responsible for making sure everyone else feels loved and safe and secure. That it's actually not our job to take the place of God. That we're not the source to meet all the needs of love and affirmation and security in other people. That instead, that's God's job. And that our worth and our value isn't at stake if we can't get everyone to see and understand what we think they need to see and understand. Our value's not at stake. Rather, in humility, we get to understand that we, like everyone else, get to share in the gift and grace of God's love. That we are co-recipients with others of God's love. Where in humility, we're invited to feel our own feelings and express our own needs and desires. And to be clear, it doesn't mean that we can act like we're owed them or take on this attitude where we demand them or try to manipulate others to get what we want or what we think we deserve, because that's how a really good and healthy thing becomes toxic and arrogant and relationally destructive. But instead, having permission to feel how you actually feel, having the freedom to express your own needs and desires and knowing those matter to God and trusting that those matter to others, rather than feeling like those needs always have to be neglected, those always have to be ignored, they always have to be sacrificed. Friends, that's where health lies. Again, that's why at the foundation of the entire Bible, according to the Bible itself, and more importantly, according to Jesus himself, is the invitation to love your neighbor as yourself. That you can't love others well unless you learn how to love yourself well. And in order to do that, we have to wake up to this sense of pride that we can all fall into at times and gently and lovingly remind ourselves, it's not my job to play God in everyone else's life. It's not my job to try to meet everyone else's needs while neglecting my own. And so Crosspointe, here's to reminding ourselves and one another of that reality a whole lot moving forward together. Take care. See you next week.
Thank you for joining us today, and welcome home. If you are in need of assistance during this crisis, please reach out at crosspoint.org/help.